And that's why human design is being distributed through the
Mhm.
global population right now, because it's your tool to navigate after that veil drops in
Yeah.
2027. We may not even have access to technology in the way that we're used to, because a big part of what I have seen in my own mystical experiences is that the earth has a Kundalini. It's part of the phoenix fire, is it raising? And this raising of the Kundalini being almost like a global EMP type effect, which
Mhm.
will
Mhm.
have to necessarily wipe out technology because it poses such a threat. That's a big part of this culmination period between now and 2027, where light workers, spiritual beings, people just, that are waking up to their own consciousness are meant to take hold of the material world in order to build the roots of the new earth, which will come to rise from the ashes of the sleeping phoenix. Any
Yeah.
concept, any construct, any system, whether it's a belief system or an economic system or a governmental system that keeps us separate and away from the truth of our oneness will be destroyed and burned by the fire of the phoenix in the era of the sleeping phoenix.
I feel like this work of learning our design, living our design, listening to our bodies, listening to Gaia, being open to what the universe wants from us as a spiritual being on planet Earth during this time of transformation. This is the most important work that we can do. Hello, I'm Maya Lila di Vento, and welcome to Conversations with Mystics, where I talk to some of my favorite living mystics. Today, I have one of my personal mentors in human design. We've been working together for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. This is Dylan, the Human Design Maven. When I discovered human design, I was immediately drawn to it and magnetized to it. This is back in 2010. But for the first like 7, 8 years, my intuition is like, don't study source material, don't read the books that I could find. And I was so frustrated of like, okay, like I feel like I'm called to study this system and I couldn't find the right teachers. And finally I found Dylan and a few other female teachers that were more in alignment with the energy that I needed to be absorbing around human design. Dylan, why don't you give us your background bio and how you found human design?
Hey everyone, it's me, Dylan, HTM. Ironically, I found human design by following my strategy and authority. I was accidentally following the strategy and authority of my sacral manifesting generator self a little bit before I actually knew what human design was. I had been on a track of a conditioned life, going to conditioned college and working conditioned jobs. And it really was draining my vitality. It really had brought me to this place at just like 20 years old of feeling like completely like I was dying, a 20-year-old version of dying. So at the time, I happened to discover this photograph of somebody hiking in a lush green forest, and something in me said, "Ooh, that is what I want to be doing. Not this cafe job, not this bus to the university bullshit." So I kept doing my 4-6 thing at the coffee house and being like, "Hey, where do you think this is? Where do you think this picture is?" And I put the pieces together to discover that I really wanted to be in Hawaii. Somebody along that conversation path told me that I could go to Hawaii and work on farms for free or work a work trade and not have to have a ton of money to go to Hawaii. And I was like, boom, there we go. Let's get into this. So I have an open solar plex center, so I was afraid to tell my boss that I was leaving. So I didn't drop that bomb onto them until 3 days before I was leaving. And I thought I was never coming back. I thought this was just going to be my new life. Spent a year on Big Island, hitchhiking around, having basically my own little eat, pray, love experience. Towards the end of that year, people kept saying to me in a very suspicious way, "You made it this far. You ought to go to Kauai." You made that specific phrase multiple times. And I'm like, okay, I made it this far. I guess I got to go to Kauai. So I had about $350 and a food stamps card, and I got myself to Kauai. And so it took about 2 weeks to hike from like the south shore to the north shore. Found myself on a Nini Beach, and one day a hand popped out from behind a tree with a mangosteen in it, offering me this token of friendship. And this gentleman ultimately would introduce me to the guy who gave me my first human design reading. So I'm looking at the screen, I'm seeing the colors, I'm seeing the shapes. Obviously, no trace of this yet, but in that instant, I knew that what I was looking at was precisely in alignment and somehow explaining my entire life. I
Mm.
knew, like, oh, that's why I'm here. That's why I'm different. That's what all that white space around my red defined centers was like, yep, that's me. That's this design. It became my special interest. And I did go back into the world and tried to do my best to live a conditioned life. I became a bartender in San Francisco, lied my way into that job. Along the way, I was studying human design whenever I could. I was picking apart my own chart, taking copious notes. I was looking up every online resource. I was hitting people up on Facebook groups for source material. I succeeded. I found everything that I was looking for and processed the whole system in 7 years. And almost like clockwork, with that cellular cycle, that Saturn cycle completing, over the bar top, my first client happened. And I was asked to give my first reading. And it was a satisfying experience for my MG. And I just kept going. I made a deck of business cards, ultimately just stopped showing up for work and was like, we're going to do this. And that's been the last 7 years of serving people in readings, containers, where I met you, showing up on podcasts, and finishing what Ross started. So
Mm. Mm.
here we are.
I love it. I've heard your story multiple times, but in this telling, we have so many synchronicities that it just blows my mind. I lived a highly conditioned life. Both my parents were school teachers. It was like you're going to college, whether or not you want to. Like that's what you do, and you got to get a job with insurance and pension. I was just like, I can't do this. I'm gonna die. And I tried for many years and suffered as a projector, working 3 jobs, living in LA, like alcoholic. It was horrible. And I was introduced to human design by a manifester who was like, "Do you know what your human design is?" And I was like, what is that?" And then as soon as I read projector, I was like, oh, fuck.
Oh,
Like, this is me. And this is why I've never felt successful. And I've always felt like I was fucked up because I'm not ambitious enough, even though I'm working 3 jobs. Like, I just knew everything was off for me and that I had to stop pushing and forcing, which I had spent my whole life trying to push and force what I thought I wanted.
yeah.
And then I also lived in Hawaii for a while, free birth my daughter there. I did go back to San Francisco. I lied to get into a waitressing job. They're like, yeah, I've waitressed, had never waitressed. And I think for me, the first year, so I'm a 1-3 splenic projector. You are a 4-6 sacral manifesting generator.
Hmm. Yeah.
So for me, that first 7 years, I could not find any materials that my intuition would even let me study or like any guidance. And so it was just me experimenting with being a projector, how the fuck to listen to my spleen, and being totally messy and chaotic in my life, but also letting my passions lead me wherever I wanted to go. When I met you and did your academy, I finally got all the information I'd been wanting, and you
Nice.
have everything so clear. Like your depth of knowledge blows my mind, and how you present everything so clearly. I was like, oh, this is a person who knows his shit. Like he knows his shit. And you're not Ra. Like Ra is a character. And I appreciate your synthesis and your kind of your evolution. And didn't you say that you discovered human design like right around when he died or something?
Yeah, it was kind of crazy timing because on my way to North Shore, being this just total vagabond, did not know. I knew one guy on Kauai from a Vipassana retreat. Other
Mhm.
than that,
Which
um,
I've also done at Vipassana.
yeah, I sat down on the Waimea River in Kauai and had one of my first mystical experiences where as soon as my root chakra touched the ground, I just blasted out of my crown. I had
Mm.
never had something like that before. And it scared the crap out of me. I'm like, what? It all happened so quickly, but in that moment, it did feel like I was like worried, just went way up above Kauai.
Mhm.
And that day was within range of a couple days of his passing. I later found out that the Tibetan lamas say that Kauai is one of these gates that the souls of the dead pass through
Mhm.
if they're actually leaving the planet and not reincarnating. So I feel like I bumped into Ra's crystal bundle
Mhm.
in that moment of synchronization and download. That's kind of what made it make so much sense to me by the time my physical eyes actually saw the
Mhm.
chart. If I
Mhm.
hadn't had that exposure, maybe activated some of those neutrinos or whatever, it wouldn't have made so much sense. It wouldn't have been such a dead ringer for me. It might have been just something I did once and moved on. But it's kind of like I felt like he, in a way, maybe probably unintentionally on his part, I doubt he would have done it on purpose because the way he runs his companies, but he passed the baton and
Mhm.
I unwittingly took it. It was just what happened. It was my happenstance. It was my serendipity, as Ra would
Mhm.
say. And I love that part of it because it feels like it's connected to a tradition in a way. If Ra was the
Mhm.
first teacher, then I kind of and in the lineage in a way. And there's probably a genetic predisposition there too, because my father and Ra could have looked like brothers or cousins. Like there's something
Mhm.
similar there. Um, and
Weird.
yeah, and so the mystery continues.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And also, I feel like you're more integrated in your masculine and feminine, where Ra was kind of more in the toxic masculine vibe. And so I like that evolution too.
Yeah, I definitely have a strong relationship with the divine feminine in myself and in the world and in human beings. That's a big part of how I serve and who I serve. It can always evolve, of course, but I always say I work for Gaia. I don't work for whoever maybe Ra was working for, whether he knew it or not. And so I'm
Mm-hmm.
taking this hypermasculine Saturnian technology
Hmm.
and processing it through my body and my coding, and then allowing it to be more accessible to people like you who are waiting for that kind of level of entry, which was
Hmm.
more about synthesis and less about judgmental typology. You know,
Hmm.
there's a bit more flexibility in how I read human design. I stay true to the roots, but because consciousness is malleable, so must the system, you know?
Yeah, and that's actually, I had, and we haven't even discussed this yet, but I had this download, I don't know, a month or two ago, that the variables in human design are actually variable. And there's this thing about like quad rights needing to come together to make the Rave children, which are the evolution of humanity.
Right,
What I received was that that's actually not entirely true, and that through living your design fully, you can kind of like epigenetically, or I don't know what the fuck, like you can change the expression of your variables. And just that the name is variables, like I don't know if that's true or not, but I would like to discuss the evolution of humanity in the context of human design and going from seven-centered to nine-centered to the rave beings that are going to be coming in. And that you mentioned on another podcast, some of us are kind of already living as raves, even if we're not like technically raves. So do you want to
right.
talk about that?
Yeah. So prior to 1781, we were seven centered beings. And this is where we get the Hindu Brahmin chakra system with the seven energy centers that go straight up and down the central column. That was a version of humanity that was purely mentally driven. And that's why all these systems of that time and of that era of humanity were very much about leaving the body. It was so mentally focused. It was about being the sadhu in the cave or the monk in the mountains, basically just denying the flesh.
And the feminine.
Right. Which is, the body being the
Yeah.
feminine aspect of our creation. And so that meant these, even by Ra's account, were like killer monkeys. That's what he called them
Mm,
because they were so violently locked into their own perspective of whatever they were
mhm,
focused on. So the
mhm,
seven-centered human was really responsible for colonialism, the
mhm,
kind of acts of violence and pillaging that spread European genetic material around the planet and created all these the roots of today's globalism or
mhm,
globalization.
And also the trauma,
And
like spreading the
right,
trauma around the world. The
right,
trauma comes from the separation of the mind and the body in a way. If you go through a
right,
trauma, your mind kind of creates this encapsulated shell where you get stuck in an energy pattern instead of feeling the fear or the sadness or the anger and moving it, you get like fractured. I find
right.
that that's part of colonialism is spreading the trauma of this disconnect across the world, which we're seeing
Absolutely.
now.
Yeah. The seven-centered human really set the stage for what we have today, which is the cross of planning. The cross of planning came in 1615. So time and consciousness is split up into these cycles of 400-ish years in the way we look at it in human design. And it's basically when a particular incarnation cross is overlaid for the entire planet. So we have these background themes that govern 400-year cycles, and it shows us what goes on in these 400-year cycles. So starting in 1615, we went into this industrial era, which was driven by the cross of planning. And the cross of planning is about gate 40 and gate 37, which is the tribal bargain, which is like if you do this task, you'll be given this protection in the tribe. But if you deviate from your task, you'll not be given the protection of the tribe and you'll die and starve alone. And it really capitalizes on our deep survival fears of being isolated in the wilderness from way back when in our evolution. And it also is about logic, gate 9, and skills, gate 16. So this past 400 years has been all about the amassing of resources, the finding the tribe for protection, the selling your skills in a logical, strategic format. And it's been the source of a lot of really deep conditioning because in this cross of planning, the only two centers that are defined are the heart and the solar plexus. So we've had this spirit awareness center of the solar plexus harnessed to the heart, the center of the material world, money, and self worth. And so the only way to access your spirit in this 400-year period has been through the amassing of material wealth. In a weird way, we found our way back around to having access to the spirit through the material. That's a big part of this culmination period between now and 2027, where light workers, spiritual beings, people waking up to their own consciousness are meant to take hold of the material world to build the roots of the new earth, which will come basically to rise from the ashes of the sleeping phoenix. So the next 400-year cycle that we'll enter into in 2027 is called the sleeping phoenix. This has been an incarnation cross that the planet has experienced before, way in the past. But at this time, in this particular alignment of our frequency or vibration and just where we are in our evolution, the phoenix will no longer be asleep. So in 2027, the phoenix wakes up. And as we discussed, Kali is the godhead for gate 55, which is the lead energy of the sleeping phoenix. Gate 55 is about unity consciousness. It's about where consciousness is no longer limited to a single human ego and beingness, that it's shared and spread, and that we wake up to the illusion that there's any separation. And we understand, not just on a conceptual level, but as an experience of ourselves, that we're all one consciousness flowing through different vessels and different vehicles. So Kali is this godhead that is the destroyer of false devotion. So any concept, any construct, any system, whether it's a belief system or an economic system or a governmental system that keeps us separate and away from the truth of our oneness will be destroyed and burned by the fire of the phoenix in the era of the sleeping phoenix. What we start to see on a global level right now, as far as instability and change, is that all these systems, while they've been a certain kind of scaffolding and structuring, they've given us the capacity to have this mass population increase. They've created societal systems that have allowed more people to stay alive longer than ever, and also to spread that genetic material in ways that is very novel. So we have all these new mixed people around the planet. And in the mixing of the gene pools and the increase of the population and the heat of the planet because of the increase of activity in the solar plexus, we created the ideal conditions for the mutation to complete. So in 2027, this long process of mutation that's been slowly happening inside the human body, generation by generation, finishes. And the solar plexus goes from being the center of motorized, emotional, dramatic energy, and it becomes a still point of unity, consciousness, awareness.
Mm,
So all the separating mental paradigms of Newtonian physics and the monetary class system and all these things that keep us separate, they're all constructs of mental awareness. And as we move into
mhm,
2027 and beyond, it's obviously not all happening all at once. That would be very, very bad if it all happened all at once. It's a gradient effect. And that's why we're all seeing some of it now. These systems dissolve and we start to live life more centered in the solar plexus awareness, which we really haven't experienced, the majority of the population hasn't experienced outside of mystical experiences, psychedelic experiences, trance experiences, things like that. We usually get it in small glimpses because our
mhm,
bodies still can't hold the bandwidth required
mhm,
for the solar plexus, which is interesting. Like on a physiological level, there's more neural tissue in the solar plex in like the gut brain than there is
mhm,
in the
mhm.
physical head brain. And so we haven't even begun to tap into what that experience could be like when that is fully online. And that's who the raves are. They're the beings that are born with that solar plexus gut brain fully
Mhm.
online as an awareness center, a like unified center of awareness that's deep in the body, not sticking out up here in the head. This focus of ascension and elevating our vibration, these are things that are part of the process, but they kind of level out as we pass through the 2027 critical mass point, and we realize that it's not about going vertical anymore. It's
Mhm.
more omnidirectional, it's more horizontal, it's more spiralic in a lot of ways. And so
And
a
also
lot,
going downward, like going
yeah,
down into the darkness and the body. And I've been doing somatic work for a few years now, and it's completely parallel to what you're talking about. Number one, humanity has been so divorced from and repressed around their emotions and the power of their emotions, especially the negative emotions,
yeah.
which our whole society is based on like, don't feel or acknowledge anything negative, whether that's anger, grief, sadness. It's like, exist from this up and don't go down,
Yeah.
don't go into the darkness. But that's actually, and I've experienced through this work I've done, the negative contractive emotions are actually where all the power is. It's like breathing. Like you exhale first, you contract, which is,
Mhm.
if you don't have any air and you're contracting, it can be uncomfortable. And then you have the power to expand into more.
Right.
And none of us in at least in the United States were modeled being able to express your emotions authentically and fully and modeled how to flow the power of that energy. You see a 2-year-old throwing a temper tantrum, and then the parent spanks them or gets mad at them or punishes them for this emotional power.
Right.
Instead of teaching them, like, yes, what you're feeling is valid and powerful and beautiful. And here's how you work with that energy so it's not destructive to yourself or other people. And
Yeah.
so it's like this perfect situation that we put ourselves in for this like projection into the next evolution of humanity. But then also, I've experienced in my body, if you go deep enough into your own personal experience, you realize we actually all have one soul. I've touched that one soul experience where I'm with another person and it's like, oh, it isn't like my soul and your soul and my body and your body. Like we're literally one soul operating.
Yeah, totally. That monadic experience. And so like the raves, it's like we're kind of a funny transition form
Mhm.
because we're nine-centered humans. The old humans, like the human humans, had seven centers.
Mhm.
Then we are Homo sapiens in transitus. So we're nine-centered humans. So we have like a rave template, but we still
Mhm.
got human software, basically.
Mhm.
And the raves are rave. So we're like the hybrids.
Okay.
And that's
Yeah.
why it's been such a unique and a lot of times uncomfortable journey because we're asked to unite these polarities of, as Ra put it, a very aggressive human that
Mhm.
was very extremist. So it was either like puritanical and all about abstinence from anything earthly and physical, or so deeply like entrenched in that there was only the ego's will, to a being like the rave who has no individual self. There really is no ego left in a rave. It's going to be a being that functions in a hive mind type situation. So a rave as a singular like baby born isn't going to demonstrate to us rave capabilities until it comes into contact with two or more raves. And
Mhm.
this is a fascinating conundrum for the future because we won't see the impact of the rave frequency until that moment that they actually get to come together. So there will
Mm.
likely be raves on the planet, but just not in their full capacity at first. So
Mhm.
2027, who knows what's going to happen? They could all be in the same hospital, right? But or whatever situation they're hopefully not a hospital. Um,
Mm.
but these are beings that if you can think of it like three beings, like three bodies of raves coming together, and then them forming one personality that is like
Mhm.
the emergent transauric personality or transauric form that comes from the union of three consciousnesses. So
Mm.
a rave body is more of a hub of consciousness than it is an individual personality. And
Mm.
so on their own, raves are going to seem very like they're going to need a lot of nurturing because they won't have the same functional capacity that us
Mm.
hybrid humans have. It's still difficult for many of us, but we can still traverse this strategic realm. What's even more interesting to think about is that once they do come together, their capacity to manifest resources on this plane will far outstrip ours almost
Mm.
immediately.
Mm.
So, individually, very vulnerable. Once they come together, way more powerful than any of
Mm.
us and
Mm.
able to do things that are unfathomable to us in the current consciousness simply because they have access to everything. These beings will literally exist in a trance-like state in which all of the collective consciousness is available to them. So
Mm.
all knowledge, all memory, probably existing out of what we know as linear time.
Mm.
And with the rise of AI and robotics, I do believe that they will make use of these in some way
Mm.
to protect themselves or
Mm.
to basically reorganize culture and society in ways that we as humans are too busy fighting in our separateness to do ourselves. And I think that's the really interesting silver lining of what
Mm.
comes after this Phoenix moment of burning down all these structures. A lot of people depend on these societal structures. Globally, like airlines, for example, we're already seeing the effects of this Sleeping Phoenix frequency change with all these airline accidents
Mm.
because they're part of a collective system that's not approved by Kali.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
so it is just going to be a very interesting ride to ride out the purge of the darkness, so to speak, and hold on long enough for the raves to basically take over.
And I feel like the last 11 years, I've been living my life pretty much only listening to my intuition and my spleen.
Right.
Whatever like crazy shit it tells me to do, I'm like, okay, I've completely released any kind of logic or reasoning and just following that intuitive, splenic, either instruction or response, which is not normal. Like a lot of people would think that I'm insane for making the life choices I have based on my intuition, but it's been a practice of increasing my capacity to do scary things that are uncomfortable and also trusting, like building faith in the greater that I'm guided, I'm led, I'm protected, I'm safe. and then being available for like the magic that arises when you do follow your strategy and authority. I've found in being nomadic on and off over the years, sometimes you'll get instructions like move here now, go here now. And I was told back in last a year ago, okay, time to get rid of all your shit and leave the United States. I'm currently living in Vietnam because I was invited here. And I was living in Thailand before that because I was invited there. And
Mhm.
I feel like if we're relying on our minds, we can get so locked in to like, well, that's not logical to move to Vietnam or whatever. And
Mhm.
if your intuition is guiding you somewhere, maybe for your own survival or benefit or because it's part
Right.
of your destiny, if we're still relying on the mind and like the limited linear conditioning, we're not allowing ourselves to act as that collective, like I keep thinking of the murmuration of birds,
Right.
where
Exactly.
you know exactly what to do and where to go from an inner calling rather than figuring it out with your brain. I find in my travels, I'm collecting my tribe and my community of people who are all, we all have the same vision, buying land in various places around the world and having retreat centers, spiritual communities, intentional communities, these sacred spaces of the new world, like pillars of heaven on earth of Eden in various places around the world. And like part of my instructions are, get sailboats, have these all be coastal where you can access them on boats because the airlines are going down
Wow.
eventually. And, like
Yeah.
I've received other like horrifying visions of the future regarding fire. But I'm also finding, and like you're probably seeing this with the awakening energy, that things people used to think were crazy or woo, like more and more and more people are like, oh no, me too. I've had those experiences, or I'm hearing voices to do things, or I'm starting to break free from my conditioning and from my fears.
Yeah, I think the piece of not navigating from the mental authority is really important because if we can think about it as the cross of planning, this time period from 1615 to 2027 is like the AM frequency band on the radio.
Hmm.
And 2027 comes, and all of a sudden, only FM is available. So
Hmm.
if you're trying to navigate on the AM frequency band, the signal is not coming in, if at
Yeah.
all,
Yeah.
not very clear. And it can get very confusing and very disorienting to try and do that. Whereas if you're on FM, it's a completely different frequency, it's accessed on a completely different layer of your consciousness, and it's nonlinear, and it is organized from a very high level of just that nonlinear capacity that we all have. That's going to be the way to move forward. And that's why human design is being distributed through the
Hmm.
global population right now, because it's your tool to navigate after that veil drops in
Hmm.
2027. We may not even have access to technology in the way that we're used to, because a big part of what I have seen in my own mystical experiences is that the earth has a Kundalini. It's part of the phoenix fire is it raising. And this raising of the Kundalini being almost like a global EMP type effect, which
Hmm.
will
Hmm.
have to necessarily wipe out technology because it poses such a threat
Hmm.
to be misused. Like in my work with medicine and in the Amazon and the consciousness of Gaia, she's like, it's going to be to prevent something and it's going to be just in the nick of time.
Hmm.
From what I see in the larger time cycles presented by Ra, these are things that I think most people have not seen because they're in more of his cosmological lectures and like the future of the rave. In the 2080s, it looks like there's something very it's it's like that's kind of like the turning point. Something happens where who knows, maybe there's a global AI led robot army that goes rogue. And
Hmm.
in that moment, the consciousness of the planet decides to activate its Kundalini and
Hmm.
stop that in its tracks. And what's left is the frequency hubs that have been created, hopefully, in that time. I've always noticed I can access my strategy and authority a lot more clearly where nature is intact.
Hmm.
Because in
Hmm.
the super developed frequencies, it's harder to tap into that deeper intelligence of the body that
Hmm.
comes from nature and is a construct of the cosmic order that nature represents. So, yeah, it's like we're in training.
Mm.
And that's what, you're being pulled into with your travels is like, how faithful can we be to this strategy and authority,
Mhm.
even when we can't see the next day, the next week, the next moment? Trust that it's the consciousness of the yin principle of the planet itself that's guiding
Mm.
us. It's not even us anymore. It's this deeper knowing that she has of our genetic potential, of our
Mm.
design, and her knowing of where to put us and how to use us best
Mm.
for the
Yeah.
bigger picture.
Yeah, and that's what I was told a year ago. Get rid of your shit. You're going to be leaving the United States and you're going to like an island. And I was like, where are we going? What's happening? What island? It was terrifying. I freaked out a little bit. And then, it took 6 months, but we ended up in Greece on the island of Crete. And then we're still traveling. And I feel like there's other islands that we'll end up on. But I find also I'm traveling with my two daughters who are both projectors. And we do unschooling, like they're just living their lives. I'm not interested in conditioning them into the matrix by putting them into a normal school or even unschooling where you're forcing a framework or like a value system onto children of like, well, you need to know how to do this and you should be studying this.
Yeah.
So why? What if they just could do whatever they wanted for their
Yeah.
entire lives instead of doing shit they don't want to do for the first 18, 24 years and then trying to figure out, well, what do I want or who am I?
Mhm.
So and I'm fairly extremist, in that I'm just like, they're going to be fine. But I also, for me, the two most important things that I provided as a mother for my children is their connection to nature
Mhm.
and encouraging that connection to nature. And I know that they will always have that connection to nature for their
Yeah.
entire lives. That's been something that I'm really proud of as a mother. The second thing is listening to their bodies, teaching them how to check in with their intuition. If they're deciding what to eat, what does your body feel like eating? And learning to differentiate. Like, okay, your mind says you want a donut. Is that your mind or does your body want a donut? Like, how to listen to
Right.
your body and listen to nature. Like, I have them when they pick flowers, I say, did you ask permission? Ask permission before you take from nature. And you can feel in your body if you listen if the nature's saying yes or no.
Mhm.
And so those are the most important things I think a parent for like for my value system and for what I see of and feel of the future, this is what's important for children and for humanity moving forward too. I think as adults trying to navigate in this transition, the most important things, like you're saying, are being able to connect to nature and listen, and also to do your nervous system work of expanding your capacity to go through fear and terror and discomfort and change and like being able to, and also feeling and grief and all the things that arise. And like, are you able to move that energy and not be overwhelmed by it, not shut down, not, freak out and have a psychotic break because you're
Mhm.
ungrounded and you don't know what to do with all the energy?
Mhm. Yeah. And projectors are the guides to this more core way of navigating. It's not new. It's always been there. It's through this unique consciousness that projectors tap into the nervous system of another person to tap into the deeper coding that is underneath all the conditioning and point someone's awareness back to who they really are and how they actually operate. And when we know that, it all takes care of itself. We don't need to worry about the cross of planning concerns of like, oh, I don't have the right skills, or I don't have the right logical frameworks, or I'm not with the right tribe. That's not going to matter after 2027. And so, yeah, maybe in 1900, that was super important and that was people's experience. But that's the kind of deconditioned preparation that Ra even said human design was for the next generations of kids so that they didn't even have to go through the conditioning in the first place. And
Yeah.
it's a really great tool for parents too to safeguard them from over conditioning their kids and seeing where their motivations for subjecting their kids to certain things actually comes from. And
Mhm.
almost all of it is societal pressures of competence. Like the parents not feeling competent, judged by other parents in this very tribal, aggressive way, and then
Mhm.
fearing that the child won't be competent because they don't have the right skills or the right
Mhm.
logic. It's really good to be able to see this stuff now because that means that parents like yourself can be emboldened
Mhm.
in their extremism because it's
Mhm.
actually equipping those kids for the future way better than this fantasy that the right skills or the right degree or whatever is going to safeguard them from the changes of the future.
Yeah. Yeah, and transitioning into the another thing I wanted to talk with you about that I'm currently in the transition of is overcoming my fears of stepping into my full spiritual, magical, whatever powers and gifts and offerings and doing that work publicly in the world and receiving money for it. And there's like, I'm having to excavate a lot of fear. Like Bashar asked a question like, well, what are you afraid would happen if everything that you're wanting to manifest came true? Which for me was like money and abundance and a career that's aligned. And the thing that popped up was getting stoned to death, which like, like
Right.
it was such a random like bloop. And I don't have any, I have past life memories of other things, but not being stoned to death. But that came up very strongly. And I was like, yeah, that's intense and sounds horrible and painful. But I have a lot of that trauma in my body from being in my power and being killed for it in past lives. And so, yeah, I'm in this transition right now of stepping through that fear and that conditioning and also opening to receive more money that I can do good with because I was raised Catholic and I almost became a nun. My conditioning is like money's the root of all evil, rich people are greedy and corrupted and like lots of programming. And
Which is crazy because the Vatican,
I
the seat of Catholicism, is the
it is.
biggest banking cartel of them all.
Yeah.
And I think that that's by design
Yeah.
to keep people from accessing their true abundance and being able to do something about it.
And especially women, like the witches, a lot of the witches were powerful women who had a lot of money, who were healers and connected to the divine, and they were killed so that the church could take their money and their land.
Right.
Yeah. Because oh, you're a witch, so now your lineage is evil and you're evil, and so we get to take everything. And that's how they amassed their wealth. A lot of it too was doing that kind of stuff with men and women. So you're working in human design and business now, right? Is that like your
That's one of the arms
okay?
of the way that I'm working because kind of like what you're alluding to, our ability to manifest, our ability to live lives of abundance, however that's defined for us, is tied to us knowing ourselves. That's the only way abundance can be sustainable, is if we're operating as ourselves. Otherwise, it comes at a great toll to our bodies and our minds and our nervous systems. And so, human design for business, calling it business to beingness, because it should just be a natural extension of your beingness to be abundant, and it can be. It's a program designed to give people that kind of a like going through that car wash with all the different layers of service that help you remove different layers of gunk because
Mhm.
we're nine-centered composite being of these electromagnetic motors, and that's what manifests what comes into our life. We are the 3D printer that projects our experience of life into the world. So the more awareness that we apply to the ways that we are blocked or stuck or feel pressured or bullied or scared into ways of working that are not aligned for us, the more room we make for our natural genius to
Mm.
show up. And that's the thing. Everybody knows what they want to do. Everybody actually knows what they're best at. Even people that think they don't, it's right there beneath the surface.
That's bringing up just you saying that. I can feel the anxiety coming up in my body. My main wounding that I'm working on right now from both my parents is you can't make a living being an artist. You can't make a living doing what you love, which I internalized as what I love and myself, like who I am as a being, is not valuable or worthy in this world. And if I try to express that fully, then I will die of starvation and poverty. That's the main conditioning I'm finding that's also related to my genius because for most of my life, I've just stayed away from my genius because my conditioning is like, your genius will lead you to death and destruction or past life persecution or whatever. And I've been, ADHD and all these other things. And now I'm realizing, like, oh, like that was just this unexpressed genius driving me crazy,
Yeah.
trying to fit into a world like the square peg in the round hole. and realizing like, okay, well, what if I let myself fully move into my genius and play with my genius rather than hiding from it or being terrified of it?
That's where all the money is. And, especially as a projector, you have such a strong capacity to be the firmware update that people
Mhm.
need. We have the hardware of the body, the software of the mind, and the firmware negotiates the relationship between both and really creates like I said, the life that we're living. So that relationship between the two is what needs the most updating. And that's what projectors are here to plug into. They plug right into the G center, right into the magnetic monopole, and that is what holds us in our illusion of the duality of our consciousness crystal, our personality crystal, and our design crystal, the body
Okay.
and the mind. So it's like a projector plugs into that G center and just attunes that magnetic monopole to a different frequency,
Mm,
the aligned frequency for that individual. And you can shortcut people back to their default settings,
mm.
not just in how they think, not just in what they do, but literally the geometric trajectory of their body as it moves through this life experience gets recalibrated. And so that's a priceless gift.
But
And that
I can only do that if I've recalibrated myself, correct? Like if I'm actually living my,
it's
yeah.
going to be better
Yeah.
that way. It'll probably be quicker and more seamless.
Mhm.
I don't think you can totally do it if you're not completely in alignment. It just maybe takes a little longer.
Okay.
You have something to offer at every level of consciousness for sure. So
Mm.
that
Mhm.
there doesn't need to be this like, oh, I'll just wait until I'm perfect because that's a very
Mhm.
1-3 thing to do.
Yeah.
Oh no, no. I think there's still more details out there. I'll just wait till I have those to be
Yeah.
abundant.
Guess I definitely have done that a lot. Even where I'm at right now, I'm gestating this offering, and it's constantly like this question of like, okay, like, am I just stuck in my fear and limitation, and I'm not quite there? I need a little bit more information or guidance or whatever. Or is the baby just not done gestating? I've been kind of fighting with that for the last few months, feeling like, okay, I need to launch this thing, but it's like it just hasn't quite felt right. Now I'm realizing like, no, it's just not done gestating. And when it is done gestating, you will know, and then it'll be the time. And so relaxing into that, like letting go of like acknowledging the fears and the limitations and the blockages, letting go of that ego will desire to force the birth to happen on the timeline that I think it should happen.
I think also there's something to be said about when you are the person that can trust themselves,
Mhm.
the people that are attracted to your offering will be people that you can trust to have
Mhm.
their own answers. And
Mhm.
then that responsibility to have the answers for them leaves, and you just are the
Mhm.
facilitator for them becoming aware of their own
Yeah.
alignment and truth.
What would you say moving towards this 2027 transition? What is your main reminder or point of advice for humans right now?
It's always going to be know your human design
Mm.
and practice that. It's really a Zen path. You got to go all in on living by strategy and authority. Generators can say, oh, well, there's nothing to respond to. It's always right there in the room with you. It's just a
Mm.
matter of letting your mind sit back in that passenger seat, really seeing life for what it is on life's terms, and letting your body move you and speak. Once you have that undeniable moment of feeling the confirmation that, yes, that did just happen, and I did make that decision and it worked out for me, then
Mm.
it becomes the most fun game you can play with life. And there are
Mhm.
definitely phases. There are on phases where it's happening all the time, and more latent phases where you're just chilling and it's not as active. It's great to study human design, but it can also become something that we get obsessed with, like getting more information. People need to be really focused on the experiment, especially given how close we are to the transition.
Mhm. Mhm. And yeah, the experiment is really just comes down to strategy and authority of like,
Hmm.
okay, how do I show up in the world and open to the aligned mechanisms of energy flow and how I move in the world and make my decisions? And then am I listening to my body instead of
Hmm.
letting the mind take over? And
Hmm.
I'm right there right now because when we left the United States last July, We went first to Italy and Greece, which I had some invitations, but then they actually all fucking dissolved or changed. And I was like, that invitation either doesn't feel good anymore or I don't even have one really explicitly, but I kind of pushed it anyways. And I'm glad we went. And it was a whole initiation in itself, but like things did not work out in Italy or Greece for me, which I was like,
Mhm.
why isn't anything opening? Why isn't anything happening? And then I was invited to move to Thailand by one of my closest friends who wanted me to come. And I said yes, with no expectation, no desire to go to Asia really. And as soon as I landed there, all these things opened, met this amazing world schooling community, had like 4 DJ mentors for DJing, found a beautiful place to live in a community setting. Like all these things just immediately opened. And I was like, oh, this is what it should feel like when I'm following my strategy and authority. And I've gotten like a full body, like yes, also like a splenic yes to that invitation. And then I lived in Thailand for 4 months. And then my current partner, who also a 1/3 splenic projector and who is also named Ra, but more like sun god Ra, not Ra Uruhu, he invited me to move to Vietnam with him. And my immediate response was a full yes. And then my mind was like, why would you move to Vietnam with this guy that you just met a few months ago? This is not a good idea. And you don't know anybody there. And like, do you even want to go to Vietnam? And like, my mind started freaking out. And I was like, no, no. I remember the moment I was invited. It felt good. It felt aligned. I'm just going to follow that. I'm just going to trust it. And then we got here and like, I love it here. I really love the energy of Vietnam. I love the people. It's beautiful. There's flowers everywhere. It's very bohemian, which I had no idea until I got here. So I'm really, as a projector, living this nomadic lifestyle. I don't know how long we're going to be in Vietnam, and I'm kind of waiting for the next aligned invitation. And my partner invited me to move to Bali with him, and it doesn't feel right. Even though my mind is like, well, he's your partner and you should move to Bali, and you've always wanted to go to Bali. But I can feel in my body, for whatever reason, that that's not the right invitation for right now, which again is terrifying and also painful of like, oh, well, he's going to move to Bali and I'm going to stay here. But I'm trusting the last 6, 7 months of experience that it works best for me if I follow the strategy and authority. And it is effective in
Mhm.
living a life that flows correctly and feels good.
Yeah.
Hmm. Thank you so much for this conversation. Do you want to share your socials and website?
So hdmaven.com is my website. Currently under construction, but you can get on the mailing list and you'll find out about all the things. And Human Design Maven, one word on Instagram.
Amazing. Of all the teachers and the people that I've met that teach human design, you are my top one. And I feel like it's because, again, like your depth of knowledge and that you live it, but also because you're meant to kind of take this evolution of human design because there's evolutions in human design even that are coming. And I've always wondered, like, well, who's like Ra's dead? Who's going to tell us what these evolutions are? And you receive information and channel. I'm like, oh, Dylan knows where we're going. And like you're saying, I feel like this work of learning our design, living our design, listening to our bodies, listening to Gaia, being open to what the universe wants from us as a spiritual being on planet Earth during this time of transformation. This is the most important work that we can do. It's not a
Yeah.
side thing. It's not like, no, you need to focus on like getting a job or whatever. It's like, this is the most important stuff. And this is why I love having these conversations. I want more of us talking about all of this because it's really fucking important.
Yeah.
So, yeah. All right.
Thanks, Maya. It's been
Thank
great.
you. Yes. I'll talk to you again soon.
Okay. Bye.